everyone, and welcome back to the Dynasty Slant, PFF's fantasy podcast that focuses on Dynasty and keeper leagues. I'm Scott Spratt, and I'm joined as always by Michael Moore. And Michael, we're kind of at the very beginning of free agency, but I think the Panthers already pretty much shut the door on every other team when they signed my boy Graham Gano to a 4-year extension with $9 million guaranteed. I think that means that only Steven Gostkowski and Justin Tucker are more expensive among kickers, so should I go ahead and book the trip? I think the Super Bowl's in Atlanta this year. Should I just go ahead and get those tickets ready to go?
Only after I select him in the first round and make him my Sebastian Janikowski.
I like it a lot. I mean, it's one thing to draft a kicker first overall in the real NFL draft, but doing it in a fantasy draft, that's just like a statement play. I feel like it's going to really intimidate the other owners in your league.
Well, yeah, that would be the goal. It's like you would get them wondering, like, what does he know that we don't know? Or what new strategy is he doing that is 10 steps ahead of us? So I think I'm going to do that, actually. I mean, I said it as a joke, but now that I'm saying it out loud, I think I'm going to try it.
It's genius. All right, Michael, let's get started with some real topics.
Oh, my God, it's picked off!
Topic 6.
All right, Michael, the Combine just happened, and that's going to provide, I think, probably a lot of content for us over the next few shows. And I've been doing a lot of work related to this. So far, what I've gotten done is really mostly running back related. So I think we should split this show into some running back Combine topics and to some other general Dynasty and Keeper League topics. I think that obviously has to start with Saquon Barkley, who absolutely crushed it at the Combine. He was the second heaviest back in this class of running backs. But he tied Nick Chubb with 29 bench press reps. That's 7 more than everyone else at the position. So obviously awesome there. And even with that power, he didn't show any signs that he wasn't super athletic. He finished second with a 4.40-second 40-yard dash, first with a 41-inch vertical leap, and he was top 5 with a 4.24-second shuttle time. Throwing all these stats at you as a way of saying that, maybe that you didn't really need to know this, but, is it obvious that he's the number 1 Dynasty rookie pick at this point?
Yes.
Okay, problem solved. Move on to topic number 2.
I can't say that fast enough, Scott. I mean, yes. I mean, and the funny part is, or the interesting part is, and I know we'll get into more of this, but there's a lot of good running backs too in this class. It's not like there's a dearth of talent at the position. I mean, there's a lot of good running backs, and yet he is just far and away the best one. I mean, another stat from his combine that I thought was funny / interesting. So he bench pressed, 29 times,
29
right?
times, yeah.
He did 29 reps. That's more than Joe Thomas did at his combine. And Joe Thomas is an offensive lineman who went first overall, to give you some perspective on just how strong he is. I mean, you can't say enough good things about it. I actually have a question for you, though.
Oh, hit me.
Because I think we've established, yes, he's very good, and he'll go number 1. So my question to you is, let's say you're in a dynasty league. What would you be willing to part with in order to trade up for that pick between veteran and rookie stuff?
Yeah.
Because look, if you just stick with rookie picks, I could confidently say I would probably trade all of my rookie picks for him. But what would be a decent sized package that you would be willing to give up for that? Because I think a lot of people are going to think about it.
You would do the Julio Jones real life NFL draft trade, or the Ricky Williams draft trade, I guess.
I was going to say, no, I've already been on record at my home league and going, look, whoever gets the first pick, I've got a Ricky Williams offer for you just waiting. Just let me know. But, I mean, honestly, what would you give up? Would it be your first rounder and 2 very good veterans, or first, second, and third and your 3 veterans? What would be the breaking point for you?
I think the way to frame this from my perspective is, this is kind of something that I was going to ask you about, is where he should go among all of your players in Dynasty. Just looking at your rankings, your top guys are Le'Veon Bell, Todd Gurley, David Johnson, Ezekiel Elliott, and so on. And in my mind, I think Barkley is more valuable than all of them. So I think he's the number 1 player for me in Dynasty right now. And because of that, I think I would part with a lot. A lot being Todd Gurley plus a lot,
Wow. Yeah.
Is that where your head's at too?
Well, no. But that gives me a good idea. Because like I said, for players like this, and I did this in many leagues a couple years ago with Zeke Elliott, when it's very clear that there's a running back like that is a true bell cow. They're going to get a lot of work. They're, on a good situation. I'm all for sort of mortgaging the future for that guy. Because, look, that's going to be your stud for the next 5 years. So I think I would agree. Personally, I would think I would still rank Barkley, at least at the moment, behind probably Bell and Gurley. But that may be it for me. I mean, he may be number 3 just because I still like Gurley, and obviously Gurley's still young. Bell is just, in a whole class of himself, and we'll get to that. But, I mean, when you think about guys like Elliott, who's got some off-field issues, when you think about guys like David Johnson, who, is coming off an injury and is pretty old for the position, relatively speaking. Yeah, I think Barkley is no lower than third, and I don't know how anyone can argue anything different.
Let me make the case why I think he should be number one in Dynasty. It's really a two-pronged case. The obvious number one is that he's 21 years old. So most of the other guys near the top of your list, even the younger ones like Gurley and Ezekiel Elliott, are at least 23. Gurley's 24. Le'Veon Bell's 26, and I know he's the top of a lot of Dynasty rankings, and I think yours, at least for now. The other reason is that he caught a lot of passes in college. I think 13.2% of his college touches came as receptions. That's a really good rate. And when you combine that with all of his combine measurables and all of his other production, the model that I've built to sort of model these players says that he looks a lot like David Johnson, Leonard Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott, and DeMarco Murray. These are all star fantasy running backs, and they're all 3-down backs. I don't really see a way that he doesn't become that unless he gets injured, and I don't really see any reason to think he's going to get injured any more likely than any of these other guys at the top of the list. So that's why he's my number one guy.
And again, I could see that argument, especially the youth part. I mean, he's 21. I mean, that's nuts, and he's already a better prospect than most of the other running backs, if not all of them. So and look, I would totally advocate for trading just a ton of picks and players for a guy like Barkley, because I really think once you have him, like, your running back problem is solved for a long time.
But Michael, you kind of previously mentioned that this running back class isn't all about Barkley. It's actually really deep, and I think there's a lot of potential fantasy assets in the mix. There's a lot of guys to potentially cover here, but let's just go through what I guess the guys that I'm considering to be the main running backs for Dynasty leagues. Let's kind of hit them one at a time and just give me your thoughts on whether the combine improved their stock, what your general thoughts are on them, and in Dynasty and Keeper leagues, just in general. I think let's start with Darius Guice from LSU.
And let me sort of jump just slightly ahead. These next couple guys, I think, are so close together that the difference for me is probably going to be the situation they land in, right? Because running backs, I mean, it's running back perhaps more than any other offensive position, at least from a fantasy standpoint, is heavily contingent on the situation. So, but having said that, he's up there as far as being in that sort of second tier behind Barkley. I mean, he obviously sort of came on the scene 2 years ago when he filled in for Fournette at LSU when he got hurt. Then he had the job full-time last year. And look, he had a very good season, maybe not at the top of the elusive rankings and the breakaway rankings like some of these other guys, but still for the competition he had and sort of the body type that he has, I think he will, there's a good chance I've seen that he'll go in the real first round of the draft, which means some team is going to make him a priority. So I put him squarely in that second tier.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. He weighed over 220 pounds and ran a sub 4.50 second 40-yard dash. That's a really good benchmark to hit for a bigger back. And it's maybe only one or two guys usually per class make that happen. Obviously, Barkley did. But Ezekiel Elliott and CJ Prosise were the last two that did it in 2016. So I think that kind of gives you a good indication. Are you worried at all about the fact that he only benched 15 reps?
I mean, not at this stage. Again, with everything else that he's got going for him and some of the draft chatter that you see, it's clear that he's going to be drafted high, first or second round. And if that's the case, then I think that's not going to matter. A team's going to feed him the ball, and volume, he's going to make up for it in volume, I should say.
Yeah. In fact, there are actually quite a few running backs that kind of fail to hit the benchmark you would expect there, given their size. Guys like LeGarrette Blount and CJ Anderson, and even Todd Gurley in recent seasons, they were like capping out at 18 or so. So I'm not too worried about that. The really only thing that I'm worried about with Guice is that he only had 6.4% of his college touches as receptions. So I think he might be an early down only back. In my mind, that might cap him as, say, like an 8th overall running back in like his best seasons in fantasy formats. Do you see that, or do you think he might be able to expand and catch some balls more at the next level?
It's interesting though, because that's kind of the same model that Fournette had, right? Meaning Fournette wasn't really viewed as a true 3-down back that could, catch a lot of balls out of the backfield. And look, Jacksonville didn't use him that way either. They used him as a first and second down guy. So I don't know that I see that ever developing. I mean, as we saw with Jacksonville, they took him 4th overall, meaning Fournette, and it's not like they were looking for him to be a 3-down back. They still used a complementary back to go with it. So, no, I wouldn't say that necessarily we should expect that, even if he's drafted pretty high.
And that's actually why Sony Michel is my number 2 dynasty back. He's a little bit on the smaller side at 214 pounds, but he put up an incredible 22 bench reps that shows that I think he's a lot stronger and plays a lot more physical style than you would expect just looking at him. And he scored really well in some of the other like agility type of measurements like the shuttle drill. So I'm liking him a little bit more in Dynasty. Did he impress you at the combine?
He did. I mean, he it's not like he blew the competition away, kind of like Barkley did, but I think he at least proved that, hey, his numbers at Georgia weren't a fluke. And look, those numbers at Georgia were really good. Like, for example, using our PFF stats, he was 6th in this class in elusive rating and 4th in breakaway percentage, which, out of, I think, the 50 or 60 running backs they profiled is pretty good, And then the other thing, and you know this, and a lot of fantasy players know this, but for rookie running backs, a big thing that coaches look for to get them on the field is, can they pass block, right? Can they protect the quarterback when they're out there?
Yeah. And
Michel was 13th in this class in pass blocking efficiency. So he's proven that he's got the ability to do that. And it was against good competition, too. It was against SEC defenses. So, and then, of course, it's going to be an interesting sort of argument of Michel and Nick Chubb, who we'll get to, because obviously they're both on the same team, so they're going to be compared a lot. But Michel he didn't have the workload that Chubb did. And given, it's not like Chubb was a workhorse either, but Michel really came on late in his career at Georgia, so he doesn't have nearly as many carries or touches, and there's a lot more tread on those tires left than a guy like Chubb or even a guy like Geis, actually. So. I could definitely see him as being number 2, just because he proved against very good competition that he's very good. He doesn't have a lot of work on him. And yeah, I mean, again, situation's going to determine a lot, but I think he's probably going to go pretty high too.
Since you brought him up, let's just go ahead and pivot and talk about Nick Chubb, Georgia teammate of Michel.
Nick Chubb is just an interesting, I guess, case study, if you will, because I remember, especially for guys that play in Devy leagues, I mean, he was it. He was essentially the next Todd Gurley. They both were in Georgia. They're both top prospects out of high school. And, he had a couple of serious injuries, so that has slowed him down a little bit. And look, if not for those injuries, I think it would be him and Barkley as the clear 1-2, but those injuries kind of took a toll on that. As you mentioned, I know in your notes, he did have as many bench press reps as Barkley, so he's got the strength.
29.
His elusive, he was 5th in elusive rating. He was 14th in breakaway percentage, so just as efficient as Michel. But, one of the things that I mentioned with Michel that he did so well was pass blocking, and Chubb really didn't rank that highly on that. He was 71st out of these running backs in this class. So that might, to me, give Michel the slight nod of the two, along with the fact that Chubb is dealing with these injuries, and also the workload. I mean, Chubb, I think his biggest workload in college in any one season was 237 touches. So he was no Derrick Henry in his last year at Alabama, who saw like 400 carries. He's going to have to be worked in, and it's going to take some time to him to sort of ramp up for a full workload. So for those two things, I would probably agree with you about Michel being above Chubb. But look, to me, Chubb is still in that tier, and if he lands in a good situation, he'll be just as good.
All right, let's move on next to Rashad Penny from San Diego State. I'll just mention that, at least to me, his combine performance really seemed similar to Geis's. He was a little bit lower with the bench reps of only 13, given how big he is at 220 pounds, but he showed pretty good speed for the size at 4.46 second 40-yard dash. So I feel like Penny might be a bit of a value. He's going off as more like the 10th running back in Dynasty rookie drafts as opposed to like second for Geis. Do you think that Penny could be a similar player to Geis, or do you think he's not as good?
No, I think he could be similar. Like I mentioned, I talked about elusive rating and breakaway percentage with Chubb and Michel. Penny was actually 2nd in elusive rating and 1st in breakaway percentage, and also 1st in the percentage of missed tackles that he forced, I think. So, no, I think he can be just as good. But that's an interesting case because he did play at San Diego State, so not nearly the level of competition that we've been talking about with these other guys, which doesn't necessarily mean he won't be as good, but that's going to be another, I guess, hurdle, if you will, that he'll have to prove that he could stack up with, world-class competition. There's that, and then the pass blocking again, which again, personally, I look at when I'm looking at rookie running backs. he ranked only 73rd, kind of down there with Chubb. And that was against competition that wasn't nearly as good as the one Chubb was facing. So I might be a little concerned, but I think Penny is still fully capable of getting there.
Yeah, Ronald Jones from USC had a bit of an unfortunate combine because even though he's considered like one of the top guys, he aggravated, or I guess re-aggravated, a hamstring injury when he was running his 40. So he has like, I guess, an unofficial time of 4.65 seconds there that probably doesn't fully reflect how fast he is. And then he didn't get to participate in really any of the other agility drills at the combine. So I guess we didn't really learn a lot about Jones while we were there. Do you still think of him as being one of the top guys to get in dynasty rookie drafts, though?
You know, I think you and I are going to agree on this. I don't like him as much as those guys we just mentioned.
Yeah.
Personally.
Why?
I know, like, for example, in our PFF draft guide, they had him as the second ranked running back. Now, given that was pre-combine, just for fair warning. But yeah, I guess there's just not enough good there for me to put him in the same class as those other guys. You know, like you mentioned, he's kind of small, wasn't a factor in the passing game whatsoever. So we have no idea what he can do there. So look, is he still a good running back? Sure, but I don't think he's going to be thought of nearly as highly as these other guys in the real NFL draft or fantasy drafts.
Yeah, and this may be a situation where his real world value is better than his fantasy value could potentially be. And I just feel like if you're only 205 pounds and you're not a guy being used heavily in the passing game like a Chris Thompson, it may be difficult for you to either score touchdowns or do something else to contribute from a fantasy perspective. So I guess that's why I'm a little bit lower on him, the same way you are.
Well, and again, I go back to it, you know, for a guy like Barkley, it's not a problem that we have a half dozen good running back prospects. But for a guy like Jones, who is not clearly better than everyone else, I mean, he's going to have to really fight to carve out a place there. And again, it'll depend on where he's drafted and in what round and stuff like that. So I just see it being kind of tough for him to stand out amongst this very good crowd.
Okay, next up, what do you think about Kalin Balzs from Arizona State?
You know, we haven't heard nearly as much as we have with these other guys. I know you've got down. He didn't have a lot of bench rep presses. So, you know, and again, I don't know that he, you know, did a whole heck of a lot to stand out at the combine. I mean, he had good numbers. Don't get me wrong. He had a 4.440. But again, there were a couple other guys that had 4.440s too. So it's not like, hey, he is truly the best at any one thing. So I don't know. What do you think about him right now?
You know, honestly, I feel like he might be sort of the opposite of Jones in my mind, where you're right, he didn't exactly wow at the combine, besides the 40 time, which is pretty good given his size, but like 15.4% of his college touches were receptions. So maybe this is a guy that actually can be a 3-down back, even if he's not as talented as your, you know, Geis or your Pennies or some of those other guys. Maybe that can get him a lot of extra fantasy value just because of the role. So I think I'm kind of liking him as a sort of a bit of a fantasy sleeper.
Well, look, if you, with you framing it that way as a sleeper, I might be able to sign up for that. But like, for example, his elusive rating, not great. He had 150 carries last year and only forced 13 missed tackles. So I'm a little nervous at that even in that limited time, he didn't sort of break out, if you will. But again,
I mean, I'm comparing him to guys like Geis, but like his 4.4 yards per carry in college were like 2 yards less than Geis. So I mean, like huge difference in the way they've performed on the field at this point, for sure.
Right.
All right. Up next, Kerryon Johnson from Auburn. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, I will say at least he's got the whole competition thing going for him, which is good. Other than that, I don't know. I didn't see any one thing that sort of stood out for me, I guess. You know, like his elusive ratings, his breakaway percentage amongst this class was very middle of the road. It's not like he, you know, was a level above other guys in any of those categories. So I don't know. You know, he may be just a guy for me. He may be drafted sort of in that 3 to 5 range of the real draft. And then look, he might be a decent rookie pick in second and third rounds of rookie drafts. But I'm not looking for real big things from him.
Yeah, I'm not super optimistic either. He did catch a pass, like 1 out of his 10 college touches. So maybe a little bit of 3-down potential. But I think I agree with you that I'm not sure that he's going to be efficient enough as a player just to get NFL touches on a consistent basis. He really had a pretty poor combine performance, just 11 bench reps, 4.29 second shuttle time, pretty middling. He had a good vertical leap, but that doesn't really mean much to me for a running back. So yeah, I don't really see a lot there. All right, and then let's close this out with Royce Freeman from Oregon. You like him as a prospect?
Yeah, and actually, I like him definitely. I mean, maybe not a sleeper because I don't know how many people are going to be sleeping on him.
Yeah.
But look, he did prove to be very efficient in college at Oregon. He was 14th in this class in elusive rating. He had the sixth best percentage of being not tackled on first contact. So, to me, that shows that, hey, in a vacuum, he did very well just by himself. And then as far as the combine goes, I know he had some pretty good numbers that you looked up.
Well, I was just going to say that I feel like because the 40-yard dash is the signature drill of the event, people are going to say, 4.54 second 40, not that great. So I'll just stress that I would say, look at the shuttle time, 4.16 seconds. That was the second best in the class, and he's 229 pounds. To me, that's a much better translator into like NFL games than straightaway speed is, because you need that agility in all types of rushing attempts. So I would say, yeah, if he's going as a second round rookie pick, he's going to be a sleeper in my mind.
Yeah, and to me, this does remind me of Derrick Henry a couple of years ago in a way that he had a lot of carries in college. I mean, a lot. He had 700 by the time he left Oregon. And look, it did concern me with Derrick Henry when he came out, but when he went to Tennessee and he was kind of, the complement to DeMarco Murray, meaning they didn't rely on Henry to carry it 250 times a year and they can kind of ease him in. I think if a team does that with Royce Freeman, meaning, hey, they have an established back that they pair with Freeman, I would love that. That would be the ideal situation for me, because in that way, they're not continuing to sort of ride Freeman into the ground, and he could get that experience, and he can kind of, build up to a point where he could eventually maybe be a 3-down back. That would be the ideal scenario.
So from my perspective, that covers all of the big names. So for the third topic, let me just ask whether you think there are any like deeper than that kind of guys that you think are really good fantasy sleepers in dynasty leagues.
Yeah, one of the guys, and he was mentioned in our PFF draft grade too, is Boston Scott. And if you haven't heard of him, that's okay. You might not have, because he did play at Louisiana Tech. Small guy. He's only 5'7", about 200 pounds, but I think he's a guy that could see some early action in the NFL, especially as sort of a passing down kind of weapon, right?
Yeah.
So his elusive rating was 4th in this class. Didn't drop any passes in college. His percentage of not being tackled on first contact was 16th in this class. So again, in a vacuum, he proved to be very efficient. Now, he doesn't have the size to be a 3-down back, and I don't know that he ever will be. But again, if he can perform on a per-play basis like he did, I think he could be a pretty decent tool for somebody. So I think if a team drafts him with that in mind, to complement sort of a first and second down back, I think he can have a pretty decent career.
That's a good one. My guy is Darryl Williams from LSU. He actually spent 4 seasons there behind Leonard Fournette and Darius Geis. So that can kind of clue you into the fact that he's not really on a lot of radars. He also didn't help himself by running a 4.72 second 40 time, which was pretty bad for this class of running backs. So he's not even being drafted in a lot of these rookie drafts, and he's pretty far off the radar. But I will say that he put up some really good measurements. Like he had 22 bench reps, and my favorite, obviously, is the short shuttle. He had a 4.21 second dash there. So pretty much in line with Sony Michel on those two. And so given that the model that I use kind of treats those as the most important drills, and given that Williams also had a 12.2 yards per reception in college, that's the best of all of these running backs. I wonder if he might be a super deep sleeper, but like a very big upside as a potential 3-down back in the future. I wouldn't bet heavily on it, but maybe as sort of a 4th round or later pick in your dynasty rookie drafts, that could be interesting to me.
I could get on board with that. And again, it's always interesting, those guys that were blocked in college by guys that, were truly, just far superior, but that doesn't mean that player like Scott wasn't good too. You know what I mean? Williams,
Scott,
you know what I mean? Yeah, right.
Yeah, anybody else? I have one more guy I can mention.
Okay. No, I don't. Okay. No.
My other guy is Justin Jackson out of Northwestern, a little bit similar to your pick too. He had by far the best shuttle time in this class, so I'm in love with the shuttle. But he's only 199 pounds, so again, he's kind of a receiving back option, but my similarity scoring model kind of likens him to guys like Christian McCaffrey and Bilal Powell and Andre Ellington. So I think maybe in a PPR format in particular, maybe he could carve out a role that, even though he's only getting, I don't know, maybe 125, 150 touches in a good season, maybe he could actually be a productive fantasy player with that kind of workload.
Yeah, and and I think we have to remember that not every back that enters the league is going to be a 3-down back or have the potential for that, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
there's only so many teams and so many roles like that. And look, if you have one, great. But look, every dynasty league I know, you have to start at least 2 running backs, if not more. So you're not going to have a 3-down back for every running back spot. So you need those guys that are going to get on the field somehow, whether it's through the passing game or what have you. So, and that's just important for guys like this who are not going to be drafted that high and don't have that ability, but can still offer something,
Yeah. All right, I think that's pretty good combine talk. Again, we'll hit on some more of this in future episodes, but there are a couple of other, I think, important dynasty storylines to hit on. So let's start with maybe the biggest, which is the Steelers' decision to put a franchise tag for the second time on running back Le'Veon Bell. Obviously, Bell has sort of expressed his displeasure at that, saying some things about how he may hold out, may retire, may do all kinds of things because he wanted a long-term contract. So, Michael, do you think that Bell may hold out? And if so, how many games do you think he's going to play in 2018?
Look, if he holds out like preseason, is that the worst thing in the world for everybody? I mean, he did that last year, and he still reeled off 1,300 rushing yards and 650 passing yards, and he caught 85 balls, which was a career high. So, if he does skip preseason, look, I'm pretty sure a lot of football players would love to skip preseason, right, and training camp, right? Nobody likes to do that. It's not fun. It's hot. You're outside all the time. It's kind of, I'm not going to say it's like a silver lining to holding out, but it kind of is, right? So, and look, with guys like Bell, it obviously didn't affect him last year. He was still awesome. So, personally, I wouldn't be worried unless it's like the week before week 1 and he still hasn't signed. Okay, then I might have some concern. But up until that point, which is like September, I'm perfectly fine with it. I think he should do what he wants to do.
Yeah, basically the Steelers put a franchise tender on Bell, and he refused to sign it last year until September 1st is when he eventually reported. And because he wasn't technically under contract until he signed the tender, the team couldn't punish him for not showing up, couldn't dock him any money. It's kind of a brilliant move. I feel like if I were a veteran back like Bell, maybe I would just want to skip all of that stuff and come when I wanted to come. So from that perspective, it's genius. But I will mention there are a couple of names I could come up with that actually did hold out into the regular season. At the running back position, there are not as many. Eric Dickerson and Emmitt Smith kind of come to mind back from the late 80s and early 90s. But more recently, guys like Chris Johnson and even Bell last year have basically used it as a way to skip camp and then report when the real season started. But Cam Chancellor, defensive back for the Seahawks, he actually missed 2 games in 2015. Michael Crabtree, you may remember, this is back when he was with your 49ers, right after he'd gotten drafted. He wouldn't sign his rookie deal and sat out, I think, 4 games that season. But it's pretty rare. So I think it's probably prudent, and like you say, to just assume Bell is going to play pretty much the whole season. But beyond just that, what are your thoughts on Bell? I mean, we kind of discussed this a little bit with Barkley, but is he still your number 1 dynasty back at this point?
Yes.
Okay, no concerns at all. You're all in.
No. Yeah, I mean, again, it was obvious last year that the time off from training camp had no effect on him, at least not in a negative way. So, and look, he's still far and away better than the other running backs. And again, that's not just a function of him. He's in a great situation, which you and I have talked about before, possibly the best situation for him.
Yeah.
So as long as he's in Pittsburgh and as long as he's on the field, he's always going to be number 1 for me. There's just no question about it. Now, look, is he getting a little older? Sure. I mean, could he be on another team next year? Sure. But for right now, for this year, I would still consider him my top running back.
This may have a little bit to do with why I have Barkley as number 1. I am ever so slightly worried about Bell from a talent standpoint. Obviously, the situation is incredible. He's going to get a ton of touches this year, especially if he's playing on another 1-year franchise tag. But just looking at his efficiency, I finally put together my rushing expected yardage model. He was over 45 yards added in both 2014 and 2015, fell off slightly to 30 in 2016, and fell to -4 in 2017, to say that he was more or less a neutral efficiency runner last season. Maybe that's injury related. Maybe that's, who knows what exactly is going on, but he is getting older. He is touching the ball a lot. He's an incredible receiver still looks really good in receiving yards added. And because of that, I think he could have a LaShawn McCoy type of move to the sunset, which means that his fantasy value is probably going to be fine. But maybe I'm a little concerned that he's not going to be the top dynasty back. But not exactly hit the panic button mode. Like, that's just kind of where my head is at this point.
Man, I wish I was in a Dynasty league with you, Scott, and you had Le'Veon Bell, because I would totally trade for Le'Veon Bell from you right now.
Totally fair. I don't have Le'Veon Bell in any leagues, unfortunately. I would be much happier if I did.
Quick side note, just because I love telling everybody that I can. So in one league that I'm in, I have Alvin Kamara.
Oh, yeah. Love him.
But I also have the number 1 pick in the rookie draft this year.
Oh, my gosh.
It's going to be awesome. It's going to be the best pair of running backs I've ever had on any team in my life.
You can make a real case that that's the number 1 and number 2 dynasty back, honestly.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And Russell Wilson's my quarterback.
Oof.
Like, if I don't make at least the finals in that league this year, I'm going to be extremely disappointed in myself.
Yeah, the best news about that team, though, is that you don't need to win this year. You have like the longest window you could possibly have to succeed.
Right.
All right, let's move to topic number 5. There's some rumors out there that free agent wide receiver Dante Moncrief could end up landing with the Ravens, who obviously we know are desperate for any wide receivers. You know, Moncrief never really made it, I guess, as a fantasy player when he was with the Colts. But what do you think of him as a player? And do you think that a potential move to the Ravens would be a big boost to his dynasty value?
No, I don't. Are you crazy?
Are
the Ravens a boost to? Are the Ravens a fantasy boost to any receiver, Scott? Ever?
Oh, ever? I mean, surely there has been one.
Name the last good fantasy receiver in Baltimore, please.
Early Torrey Smith?
Maybe. I'm thinking maybe like Derek Mason. That's how far back I'm going.
Steve Smith had at least one, I think, really good year. My
and that's
former
fine.
Panthers boy, Steve Smith.
That's fair. But look, as long as that regime is there, which, look, I'm not saying they should be replaced or they're not a good regime. Look, they won a Super Bowl. I get it. But as far as fantasy purposes go, and as long as Joe Flacco is the quarterback there, I can't see a fantasy receiver turning in a wide receiver 1 or barely even a wide receiver 2 season, quite honestly. So when you asked me about Moncrief, I didn't like Moncrief to begin with, just as a player. I mean, I think he was just far too inconsistent for me in Indy. And look, Indy was as good a situation as you could possibly get as far as receivers go. Okay, he had it made there, but he just could never make a go of it. Now, given injuries have played a factor in that too, but again, the best season he had 733 yards. So it's not like, hey, he showed a flash and then went back down. So when you ask me, maybe will things be better in Baltimore? No, because they weren't good in the first place and they're not going to get any better.
The one potential silver lining is that he would potentially become the number 1 receiver on the team, whereas he was always playing second fiddle to T.Y. Hilton with the Colts. But I'm agreeing with you that I just don't think he has the talent to actually be a number 1 receiver. Since his debut in 2014, he's got negative 56 receiving yards added. That's the 14th worst among the 125 receivers that have at least 150 catchable targets over that stretch. There are some guys you can sort of stretch out and call number 1 receivers, like Kelvin Benjamin and Devin Funchess in that range. So like maybe he's better than Jeremy Maclin, but he doesn't really seem like a real number 1 receiver to me. So I am agreeing with you. Let me do just a couple of quick comparisons in your dynasty rankings. Would you rather have Moncrief if he lands with the Ravens or Devin Funchess with my Panthers?
Devin Funchess with your Panthers.
All right. What about Moncrief or Devontae Parker?
Devontae Parker. This is going to be real easy.
This is going to be easy. All right. What about Moncrief or Will Fuller?
Will Fuller.
We'll talk more about him a little bit later. What about Moncrief or Martavis Bryant?
Martavis Bryant.
All right. I didn't go deep enough. Bryant's the number 44 in your dynasty rankings. And I basically, yeah. So basically, you're not interested in Moncrief. Sell him if he lands with the Ravens because people might believe. Is that kind of where you are?
Well, yeah. Look, even if he stayed in Indianapolis, he wouldn't be that high on my list, quite honestly. And I would still take those guys you mentioned over Moncrief, even if he stayed in Indianapolis.
Okay. I guess the one disagreement I would have is that the Ravens, I think, would be a better situation for him because of the internal competition of targets. But I'm with you that he's still not much of a fantasy asset, no matter how you slice it.
Correct.
All right. Last of the topic 6, we have Chris Ivory, one of my faves. He became one of the first free agent signings when he signed a 2-year contract to join the Bills for a very small $3.25 million guaranteed. Just to give people a bit of a ballpark for that, some recent deals signed by backs in that ballpark were guys like Rex Burkhead, Adrian Peterson last year, Danny Woodhead, Eddie Lacy with the Seattle signing. So like a lot of those guys are kind of role players and backups. Do you think that's kind of what Ivory is, or do you think that he is a threat for more touches and potentially a threat to affect LaShawn McCoy's value in both this year and in Dynasty?
Well, and look, I think I know you and I disagree on this. I think Ivory's a complimentary player. He'll spell McCoy. I don't see him carving out anything significant in Buffalo. I think he's a backup. I think they use him as depth. Look, I applaud Ivory because he's played the system over his career pretty well. Like, he got that crazy contract in Jacksonville 2 years ago that nobody saw coming. He then, this offseason, was one of the first running backs to sort of find a home before the market is flooded with veteran running backs to sign. So, look, he's gaming the system. I applaud him, but he's just not, I don't think he's good. I think that's the simplest way to put it. I mean, he had a 3.5 yards per carry last year in Jacksonville. He ended up getting outshone by guys like, TJ Yeldon, who, kind of had a bounce back. Who was the running back that came on late that was kind of their little spark plug?
Remember? Oh, yeah, the receiving back that crushed in the playoffs. Corey something?
Corey Grant.
Yeah,
that's
Corey
right.
Grant. Yep. Got it. That guy's awesome.
Yeah, so by the end of it, Ivory was fourth of those guys, none of whom, besides Fournette, I would call, like a stud. So, no, I don't think he's very good. I think this is purely a depth signing. And look, I think it's very possible he gets cut before the season even starts, depending on how their draft goes. So, now, the other part about this is, and I know you and I have talked about this offline, but I don't know that McCoy may be there at the beginning of the season either. I mean, if Buffalo goes full on kind of rebuild mode, and look, all indications are they're going to have a new quarterback. They've got a lot of positions to fill on offense. So it's possible they trade McCoy even on draft day for something decent while he still has value. So no, I think this is just a signing for depth.
I don't have a strong opinion about what their interest would be in keeping or trading McCoy, but I do have, I guess, pretty different thoughts than you about Ivory and what it might mean for McCoy if they're on the same team together. The first is that you're right, his yards per carry total was really bad, but one of the things that my expected rushing model tries to do is adjust for the difficulty of the carries they have, and it pretty much showed that all of the Jags running backs had very difficult attempts where guys were stacking the box against them. I mean, Blake Bortles, what do you want? And basically, when you suss it out in the model, it suggests that both Fournette and TJ Yeldon were actually quite good, with at least 15 yards added last season. And Ivory was about average at -5 yards added, which he did over 112 carries. I bring up that total of carries because last year on the Bills, behind McCoy, Mike Tolbert led the team with 66 carries, and no one else had even 3. So this was the entire McCoy show with nobody else to really compliment him except Tolbert on goal lines and stuff. But the reason that is also important beyond just the fact that that's a ton of work is that, at least by my model, McCoy wasn't very effective with -65 yards added. That was actually the worst of all running backs and 20 worse than Christian McCaffrey and Doug Martin, who were the next 2 worst. Obviously, McCoy continues to be a really effective receiving back. So I think he is a better player than that might make him sound. But I feel like the Bills would be prudent to try to maybe ratchet McCoy down to more 200 carries, kind of lean on him more as a receiver and bring in somebody that's more of an explosive runner, even if that's his one dimension, which I think Ivory can do that quite well. So, yeah, I guess I'm more optimistic about what Ivory can do. Will that lead to fantasy value? Probably not. But I think it might mean that McCoy is more of a running back 2 than a running back 1, which I don't really know where he's going to draft given his age, but that's just kind of where I feel like he is at this point.
You'll all get through this. I give you my word as a real doctor.
Ask Dynasty Dr. Michael.
All right, welcome back to the segment that's sweeping the nation, Ask Dynasty Dr. Michael. We've got a few good questions this week. The first comes from your former co-host when I was basically dead to this community, Russell Clay. He asks, Michael, how did you become so handsome?
Scott, I actually get this question all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure.
So I understand it. I get it. So in an attempt to explain this, all I can say is a lot of it is the genes, stuff that I just drew the handsome lottery.
Yeah, you were born with it.
Yeah. But look, I did, it's a little dab of hair care products, skin care products. You got to take care of yourself, Scott.
Yeah, you need a good regimen. That's for sure, especially when you get up into your 30s like us, right?
Yeah, I don't wake up like this every day. I got to put some work in, but
Absolutely.
but that's really the simplest answer to this. So I understand it. And look, anytime anyone has any questions or wants any kind of tips, I'm here for you.
Absolutely. Clay actually asked the question, what are we doing with Julio Jones and AJ Green in Dynasty? So what are your thoughts on something actually fantasy related?
Well, look, let's get the boring part out of the way. Like, we're all in on Julio Jones. Okay. Like, you and I will agree on that. He's still young enough. He's still dominating enough. He still has a great quarterback, at least for his fantasy situation. There's no argument there. He's still top 5 for me. And look, he probably will be for a couple of years. I don't see a scenario that he's going to drop too far from that. Can we agree on that?
Yeah, the main thing I'll point out with Jones is that I think the 3 touchdowns he scored last year were a total fluke. He was second behind only DeAndre Hopkins with 26 targets inside the 5. That's a fluke. He's scoring 8 touchdowns next year. Draft him with confidence.
Right. Well, and to that point, the lowest total he's ever had touchdown-wise in a season, at least where he played at least 13 games, was 6. Right? So, yes, I agree with you. Like, in a full 16-game season, 3 was a total fluke. So, now, let's get to the more interesting topic, which is AJ Green. So last year he had, I would say a below average season, at least for AJ Green standards. So he had 75 catches. He only had 1,078 yards. He did have 8 touchdowns, so that made up for it. Same age as Julio, but if you don't have a good situation around you, it's very tough to sort of keep that up, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Like if you're constantly being relied on to be the offensive playmaker in that offense, which he continuously is, look, it wears you down. Like, it really takes a toll. And so I could see AJ Green, I guess, sort of dipping at a faster rate than Julio. Now, he's still in the top 10 for me as far as dynasty rankings go. But do I see a scenario where he could start dropping out of the top 10 even as early as this year? Yeah, I definitely could see that.
He's definitely not in my top 10 anymore. Again, leaning on yards added. He had a really bad season last year. It's been kind of a decline for him over the last few years. 2014, 2015, he added 43 and 40 yards. 2016, he added 15 yards. Last year, he cost the Bengals 51 yards, which is near the bottom of the league at the position. I just don't think Green is the same player that he was anymore, like beyond just the situation. So I would say you should probably get rid of him in your dynasty formats. Don't draft him. Maybe John Ross becomes a sleeper, although he's more of a deep threat, but I would personally would look elsewhere at the position.
Well, and I think the one thing that could salvage his value, quite honestly, they haven't had they've had decent second receiving options there. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Mohamed Sanu and Marvin Jones didn't really break out till they left Cincinnati, but it would be really nice to see another competent, well-rounded receiver to pair with Green. And yes, you mentioned John Ross, but he's kind of a specialty receiver. And look, I'm hopeful also that with Joe Mixon sort of emerging, if they can maybe shift more of the offensive attention towards him, maybe that frees Green up to where he can maintain a good level of production the next couple of years. But again, without some kind of help around him to sort of, bring up the rear of that ship, I agree with you. I think Green could start falling off pretty quick.
Okay, up next, we have one of our co-PFF writers, Tyler Beaker, who asks, what's our take on a guy like Nick Chubb, who had a terrific combine, but has near a 0 track record of catching the ball in college? With how important receiving skills are for today's modern running backs, how does he stack up in your running back rankings? And Michael, let me take this one because I think something I've been working on kind of fits with this. The prospect projection model that I mentioned a couple of times on this prospect, it kind of brings a variety of stats and measurables and stuff into a projection for how much a guy's going to catch the ball at the next level. That includes things like his height, his weight, his hand size, his bench press, 40-yard dash, obviously the short shuttle, I love it, the 3-cone drill, and importantly, the receiving ratio he had in college. So what percentage of his touches in college were catches versus rushes? College receiving ratio is, in my model, one of the heaviest weights with the regression, and that's kind of what my research suggested. But it's not a deal breaker, especially if he shows some other agility drills, some good quickness and agility. And in my mind, Chubb did that at the combine with a 4.52 second 40 time, with a 4.25 second shuttle time. And so he ends up projecting as having more catches at the next level than guys like Darius Geis, Rashad Penny, and Bo Scarborough, just to name a couple of guys, even though they had a bit higher rate of catches in college. So I don't think it's necessarily like a non-starter that he could catch the ball at next level. He's probably not going to be Barkley, obviously, but maybe enough to make him a viable running back one in a lot of his best seasons. What do you think about that, Michael?
Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, I think his talent running the ball is so great that, I think a team is going to try to find out and try to work in the receiving game part of it. And look, he's got a very good chance to. It's not like it's impossible that he couldn't develop that skill set. Again, it's going to come down to, sort of the team he's on and kind of what offense he goes in. Because, look, it's very possible he goes to a Jaguar situation, much like Leonard Fournette did, where, hey, they rely on him for first and second down, and they've got a more explosive weapon, if you will, in the passing game. That's very possible. And if that's the case, he could still be a running back one. It just may not be a top-tier running back one. That makes sense.
It does. All right, we've got one more question from Andrew Fleischer, who asks, Will Fuller, overpriced or underpriced? What are your thoughts?
Well, let's first look at the price
Okay, that's
and
fair.
determine if he's overpriced or underpriced.
In the PFF Dynasty rankings, the consensus has him as the number 29 wide receiver behind guys like Josh Gordon, Des Bryant, Demaryius Thomas, Devontae Parker, and Jordy Nelson, and just ahead of receivers like Michael Crabtree, Corey Coleman, Mike Williams, Devin Funchess, and Emmanuel Sanders. So given that, what do you think?
Oh, man. That might be a little high for me. It's not far off, but maybe just a little high, right? Like, meaning I would love it if he were more of a threat on sort of those short to mid-range targets. Because, look, his skill set is such that he is the deep ball threat. Can we agree on that? And he's very good at it.
He's a downfield target for sure.
Yeah. And look, he's got a good quarterback that he's tied to now. He's got a receiver opposite him that takes a lot of defensive attention away. I think I've got him in the low 30s as far as dynasty rankings go, which I think for me, that's still where I like him. I mean, he's still young enough, thankfully, so you've got a lot of years, but he just doesn't see, I guess, enough targets to bump him up any further. He's very good at what he does, and he's very good in the role he's got now, but I would just like to see a little more volume, I think, before I move him up any further. So to me, I would say 29th is overpriced for me.
Okay. I don't have any dynasty rankings, so you can't actually hold me accountable, but I'll say that I think he's actually a bit underpriced. And a lot of that is about some of the guys in front of him, like Des Bryant and Jordy Nelson, that I think are on the downswing. But I'll also mention that Fuller added 20 yards in yards added on just 35 catchable targets last season. By rate, that was up near guys like Tyreek Hill, Marvin Jones, and Ted Ginn, who are kind of similar in nature as field stretchers. So I could see it. I think I could see him being a wide receiver too, even though obviously Hopkins is there dominating a lot of the targets. I just think he's talented and he's young and he's got a good quarterback. So put him more in the 25 range, I think, among wide receivers. And I think that's probably where I would have him.
Okay.
All right, Michael, we're running a little long, but I think we always have time for some gunpoint banner, right?
Always.
Guys.
Gunpoint banter.
All right, suggested by you, I think this is a good one. With Saquon Barkley breaking everyone's minds at the Combine, it seems pretty likely that he's going to become a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, not just in Dynasty rookie drafts. So, Michael, which of the teams in the top 10 do you think he would be the best landing spot for Barkley from a fantasy perspective?
Well, and I've been sort of beating this drum for a couple months now, at least as long as we've known the draft order, and I would love it if he ended up on the Giants at 2, which I think is a
pick,
which I think is a very real possibility. I mean, the Giants have not had a good, at least fantasy running back in quite some time. They've kind of been doing this, musical chair number as far as, maybe we'll try Paul Perkins there, maybe we'll try Orleans Darkwa there, huh?
Wayne Gallman,
right? Right. I mean, they just have not been able to find anyone to take that job. And look, there's not going to be a better running back prospect in this draft for at least probably 5 years, maybe even longer. So why not get the best one? You plug a hole that you can have filled for a very long time. You're pairing probably, according to guys like you, the best running back with the best receiver in Odell Beckham. I mean, a team with both of those guys is nuts, and it's scary.
Beckham is your favorite receiver, not mine, but
fine. But he's a top 3 receiver and a top 3 running back. I mean, you're talking like Steelers territory here, right? When it comes to a fantasy perspective. The other thing is, And this sort of developed, after the fact. But you've got the Giants with Pat Shurmur now as their head coach. And I mentioned this in an article I wrote a couple weeks ago as far as fantasy winners and losers from the coaching changes. But Shurmur loves a workhorse back everywhere he's been, whether it was offensive coordinator in Cleveland, whether it was offensive coordinator in Minnesota. He's always had a bell cow that he's given 250 to 270 carries every single year, right? He was the offensive coordinator for the Trent Richardson heyday in Cleveland, right? And look, he would have had a workhorse in Minnesota in 2016 if he didn't have Adrian Peterson have a severe injury. He would have had a workhorse in Minnesota last year with Dalvin Cook if he didn't go down after a month. And every other year of his 9 years as a coordinator, which is 6, he's had a running back that had 265 carries. So this guy loves to have a singular running back to build the offense around. And what better running back than Barkley? So to me, if he landed on the Giants and you've got Beckham and you've still got guys like Ingram and Shepard, and look, I think Eli Manning is decent enough that he could get by with that much talent around him, that they could still do a lot of good things. So for me, it would be the Giants.
I don't think it really matters what coach ends up getting him because Barkley is so good. He's going to obviously be the featured back. I think I'm going to pick the Colts as my team, though, as the best potential fit. And I say that because back in 2016, when Andrew Luck was healthy, T.Y. Hilton had a 13.5-yard average depth of target. That trailed only Julio Jones, Terrell Pryor, and Mike Evans among receivers with at least 75-plus receptions. So Hilton is really a deep threat. They don't really have anything to work the shorter areas of the field, especially if Dante Moncrief leaves. Frank Gore's also gone, not like he caught a lot of balls, but they don't have any guy to work those short routes. And so to me, Barkley would be a great fit, both as a heavy volume runner and as a short field target. And you kind of already stole my thunder by saying this, but I feel like they would become Steelers light with that kind of trio with Luck coming back healthy. So I would really like Barkley going to the Colts, although I can't really imagine a situation where he wouldn't be incredible in fantasy. So, this is maybe the not as most intense of a dynasty gunpoint
the most
banner.
divisive argument.
Whatever. It's going to work out either way. So, draft him in your dynasty rookie drafts. That's the major takeaway from this show, I think. Meanwhile, I think that's going to pretty much wrap it up for today's episode of the Dynasty Slant. So thanks a lot for listening, and please subscribe if you haven't already. We are part of the PFF Fantasy Specialty Podcast, and feel free to subscribe and leave us a comment on there. We'd love to hear from you. And otherwise, I think that's going to do it. So thanks so much for listening. Catch us again in 2 weeks, and rest in peace, Woody Durham, longtime caller of my alma mater Tar Heels basketball teams. All right, thanks so much. We'll talk to you again soon.